They're going to come back, probably.
Oh, no.
I will now call back into session the February regular meeting of the City of High Point Planning and Zoning Commission. I will now ask the recording secretary to conduct a roll call vote of the commissioners that are in attendance this evening.
Okay, commissioners, when I call your name, please answer present if you're here. Mr. Zuzak?
Present.
Mr. Kirkman?
Present.
Ms. McGill?
Present.
Mr. Moore?
Present.
Mr. Morgan?
Present.
Ms. Swift?
Present.
Mr. Venable?
Present.
Mr. Walsh?
Present.
Mr. Wheatley?
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 members that are here.
Very well, we do have a quorum. This is a continuation of the February 23rd meeting held over from the previous Tuesday night. I want to acknowledge for the record that additional public comments were received for the zoning map amendments 21-01 and 21-02. And the commission will now deliberate and formulate its recommendations on each of the items heard on Tuesday evening. Because this is a remote meeting, again, commission members need to flag the chair, and I will recognize you before speaking so that everyone will know exactly who they're listening to. We'll start this evening with a public hearing item, zoning map 21-01. We did receive several comments. I just want to mention the names of the individuals, members of the public that sent these, so they'll know they have been received and taken under advisement. James Cutler, Julie Ann Kirsch, and Edgar P. Forhan, Penny Sue Bro, Patricia, and Nicholas Gasco. Is the applicant with us this evening?
Yes.
Mr. Terrell, did you have a chance to read the comments that the public sent in since Tuesday?
Yes, I have.
Would you care to respond to any of the questions or comments that were made?
Yeah, not all of them, but I would be pleased very briefly to hit a high level. The first comment from Mr. Cutler, new experience for me to have a next door neighbor who was a professional wetland scientist. He asked several questions related to potential 404, 401 permitting. They were all very good, well thought out questions, but it's important for me to make sure everybody knows that Pilot Environmental has already been on the site. They have delineated all of the streams. There will not be any type of disturbance that would require a federal 404 or a state 401 permit. I think it's always important to note stream buffers and in these types of environmental protections are never the subject of zoning debate. A developer has no latitude whatsoever to dismiss those requirements. You have to. It is an absolute must that you adhere unless you go through a very long and cumbersome process for things like stream buffers, stream buffer variances, things like that. As to the buffers adjacent to the homes, I might not have been very clear in our description of what would be there, but I think it's important for the neighbors to know that in every place where the vegetation is disturbed as part of construction, there will be a fence. It's not a might or possible situation. There will be a fence and there will be a double row of evergreens that are of a variety that reach at least 25 feet. What we will not do is disturb the stream buffer in order to plant trees in the stream buffer. And that was what we were trying to say in our application. So the stream buffer itself stays fully protected, but where we're adjacent to homes, we want to make sure that we not only meet the city standards, but exceed the standards. On the issue of density, anytime you do multifamily, everybody says, whatever you propose is too dense. I mean, we've seen that many, many times. But Foxwood Meadows had an opportunity to have a project in 2005 that included some single family homes. They fought it very, very hard and it was turned down. So, so they also have been looking for a chance to get out when there's flooding. Well, they had a chance in a rezoning 20 years ago, but fought the connection back to Deep River Road. So you can't fight everything all along. Although we did have one neighbor Ms. Gasco, she was one of the neighbors who wrote in, who says she will not accept anything. That's what she said at our neighborhood meeting. And we asked her what she thought the developer should do. She said, that's their problem, it's not mine. So as to, we could bargain against ourselves on density, but there's a bottom line that this is a very difficult site to develop. You have to have density because a third of this site is taken up by streams and stream buffers, and you can't put single family homes and pay for all of the construction on that. Now, as to the green space and the wildlife, I do want to say a part of this site will remain green and undeveloped because of the streams. I think someone was one of the neighbors was upset that I dismissed that. I don't dismiss that, but I do comment that it's always a complaint from somebody who lives in a developed property that displaced wildlife. So it puts the developer in a very clear disadvantage on how to respond to that coming from the sources. And then the final thing has nothing to do with this property, but I could not help but notice that one of the neighbors who wrote called High Point a cultural wasteland. My family's been here for a few generations. I grew up here. I came back here and raised my children here. I think High Point's a wonderful city. We're not New York City. Gladly, we're not New York City, but we are not a cultural wasteland. And we are a city that not only has been vibrant, but we're getting better at that. And I'm proud to be a part of it.
Very good. Thank you. As the commissioners move into deliberation, I'm going to put a few things out for consideration. And I'll start with something Mr. Durrell said the other night, that compatible doesn't necessarily mean identical. The buffer issues, it appears to me that in nearly every case, the developer has offered more than the city normally requires. As far as flooding of Foxwood Meadows, that primarily comes from the old city lake. And the dam is only so high, can only release water so much. It's not water coming down onto Foxwood Meadows. It's water backing up to the deep river all the way to the dam at Ocala that then rises and floods. Granted, you will have more impervious surface when you have a development like this, but you're also going to have a retention pond which can trap and release water at a more gradual pace. So the things that the developer has offered and is doing, to me, seem positive and make this a feasible development, in my opinion. Anybody else have any thoughts? Chair recognizes Mr. Wheatley.
Wasn't it mentioned that the hard surfaces, the displacement of water, the water catchment system had to match whatever that was, so it ends up being equal to what the way it was?
I think that the idea is that the same amount of water is going to fall on the property, whether it's left in a natural state or whether a portion of it is developed, has been suggested. As far as the runoff, you may see a reduction or a slowing of how quickly it runs off because it'd be caught by the pond and released. I mean, it could actually improve some things. I don't see where it would make anything any worse. Chairman recognizes Mr. Uzak.
Mr. Shannon, I have a couple questions for you. In looking through here, is there a limit on how many stories those apartment buildings can be?
Herb Shannon, senior planner. The applicant has offered a condition that within 75 feet of the southern property line, building heights are limited to 50 feet. Beyond that, building height will be governed by the requested OI district, which allows up to 50 feet building height, up to beyond 50 feet, there's additional setback for each foot above 50. So you can go above 50 in the OI district, But for each foot beyond 50, there's an additional foot of setback.
So that's why there's no,
Yeah. And Mr. Burnett just clarified, that's up to a maximum of 80 feet in height for the office
and how
institutional
many
district.
stories would 80 feet be roughly?
I hate to get into stories because you could have someone doing the bare minimum, just an 8-foot ceiling, and some other developer could do 10-foot high ceilings. That's why we try to stay away from ceilings, from stories, to just go by height, because you could have a 5-story structure or a 3-story, depending on how the developer wishes to build.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, and you may end up telling me that this is really a question for Mr. Burnett. I'm looking at the map on page 11 of this package, and this is the one that has the land use designations. And it's the one that shows that the yellow area around this site is classified as low-density residential.
Yes.
And these terms, like low-density residential, come from the land use plan.
Yes.
And I'm trying to figure out if the land use plan says this area should be low-density residential, what does that mean? Can people come in and say, well, yeah, but we'd like to build an apartment building here?
Low-density residential from our land use plan promotes residential development up to 5 units per acre. That does not necessarily mean it will be single-family detached. You could have a townhome, single-family attached, or multifamily development that doesn't exceed that 5 units per acre.
But I'm thinking you're not going to get apartments that are going to meet that qualification.
You could have a property that has a multifamily zoning. I think you have a situation, if you look on your map across the street, I think that's the Lake Point townhomes. That has a zoning designation of RM5, residential multifamily 5. That land developed as a townhome development, but they could not exceed 5 units per acre. You could have a situation where a property has a residential multifamily 5 district and do multifamily, but they're capped at that 5 units per acre. That's based upon that zoning
This
district.
is Chairman Kirkman. I think I know where you're going. Can you define, when you say unit, when we think about single family and you say 5 units per acre, it's 5 houses. But when you look at apartment buildings, you could put 5 per acre, but 1 unit could hold 10 families?
We're looking at the total number of dwelling units, whether that's in one large building or several buildings.
So the number would still relate to an apartment? If we had one building, but it held 5 individual dwellings within the same building, is that the 5?
What staff would look at is what is the number of units on the property? Say, for example, here's the most you can do. Whether those units are in one structure or in multiple structures, we're just looking at the number of dwelling units.
So if I've got 1 acre, 5 units per acre, and I have 1 apartment building and there's 8 dwelling units in it, that won't go?
No.
Okay.
But it looks like the apartment buildings that we're talking about here each apartment building has 24 units in it.
I would not look at the number of units in the structure because that could change. We're looking at the total number of units that they're proposing to place on the site. That's how we will calculate density, not by how many units are in a structure, but the total number of units upon the entire site, whether that's in one structure or multiple structures. We're looking at total number of dwelling units.
Let me just add on to what Herb has said, particularly relates to the land use plan and policy. The land use plan is a policy guide or policy document. It was reviewed by Planning and Zoning Commission, adopted by City Council. It's amended over time. There's been amendments as a result of the Eastchester corridor plan. So as things do develop over time, there are changes and amendments to that. And also to zoning decisions, prior zoning decisions can also affect, any kind of zoning decision that the city may ultimately make as well. So when you look, in each of the land use categories, there is a definition, and Herb was correct. It's primarily, it's predominantly intended to be single-family residential, but it could be other uses because we have schools, we have churches, we have fire stations, and as Herb mentioned, we've even had some small-scale single-family attached developments that are at 5 units to the acre. The governing factor is, in many cases with the land use plan, is the density, the intensity of development. And that's not just on the residential scale, that's also on the commercial end, because we have local convenience as well as community regional commercial, which is basically looking at not the uses, but the scale and the impact of commercial in a given area and what may be there. So it's basically up to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council to determine what is consistent with the plan, what works within an area. But generally speaking, what does give guidance is the description in these land use categories, along with the other policies which are written into the staff report there, the goals and objectives, and the density factor that's there. Office and institutional is a broader category. It typically does not allow single family. It's not something that you typically discourage. Doesn't mean that the city couldn't allow single family development in an office and institutional land use category, but it's ultimately the zoning district that determines what is allowed, and it's ultimately the Planning and Zoning Commission's, upon recommendation to the City Council, that determines what is appropriate for that location. So I want to give you a little bit of background on how to use the plan. You don't read the plan the same way you read an ordinance. The ordinances, you read it very literally, and as Herb mentioned, the zoning district caps the number of units per acre. It's set by ordinance, and it's set by the standards that any development must meet in terms of that ordinance.
Thank you.
This is Chairman Kirkman again, and I'm trying to wrap my head around some numbers that Commissioner Uzak brought forward. You had a 21-acre site, an R5, assuming that you just built out everything at an R5, you'd end up with 105 units would be allowed on that property. And at the zoning that they're proposing, they're looking at 216. So even, we talk about figuring on the gross rather than the net, so you can get your density back up to what it would otherwise be if you could utilize the entire property. This is quite a bit more.
I think the zoning actually allows them 16 units per acre.
Currently?
No,
That's what I'm saying.
zoning. What they're asking for.
Right. So in other words, most of the time when somebody is asking for an increase in density on a difficult piece of property, so they can get back to what you would have had at an R5 if you could use all the property. If you have to use less of the property, you ask for more density to still reach that number. But this number is well above the 105 units.
Well, I think there's a little bit of confusion here. The current CUOI district had a condition from the late 1990s that said no residential use. The land use plan designates this area as office, which supports office and some multifamily. And that's the big picture. Now we're getting down to the requested CZOI district. The OI district allows residential uses up to 16 units per acre. So when you said 5 units,
We don't actually have an R5 designation on the property currently.
Yeah, there's no R5 designation on this site, and the land use plan is not low density residential for this site.
Okay, that clears it up.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or any other deliberation from the commissioners? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve zoning map amendment 21-01 as presented.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve as presented by Commissioner Wheatley. Mr. Walsh has seconded the motion. Before we vote, or does everyone understand the motion? Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please answer yes or no in response to the motion by Mr. Wheatley to approve zoning map amendment 21-01 as presented by staff. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill. Yes. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift. Yes. Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well, by a vote of 9-0. This request by Leo Terra Development, zoning map amendment 20-01, has been favorably recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. We will need a consistency statement in support of this recommendation for the record.
I'll give a consistency statement.
Very well.
I move the commission adopt a statement that zoning map amendment 21-01 is consistent with the city's adopted policy guidance because the requested CZ01 district is supported by relevant goals and objectives of the land use plan and the Eastchester corridor plan as referenced in the staff report. Furthermore, the request is reasonable and in the public interest because the requested CZOI is district will enable development pattern that is consistent with the existing land use pattern established along the segment of Eastchester Drive, which is office use along the street frontage and residential uses on the remaining area of the site.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Venable has seconded the motion. Consistency statement has been moved by Mr. Wheaton. Again, seconded by Mr. Venable. I will ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, please respond yes or no in response to the motion to adopt the consistency statement as read by Mr. Wheatley. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift. Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
By a vote of 9-0, the motion carries. A recommended statement of consistency has been adopted. Final public hearing on this item will be held before City Council on March 15th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. in these chambers. The second item to cover this evening is zoning map amendment 21-02. There were also 2 public comments received over the course of the 24 hours subsequent to Tuesday's meeting. And I just want to note for the record that Johnny and Barbara Johnson submitted a comment and Keith Yoakley submitted a comment. I assume that the commissioners got those and had time to read them. Is the applicant present?
Yes, I'm here, Judy Stalder.
Very good. Did you receive those comments?
Yes, I did.
Is there anything you'd like to address or respond to?
Yes, I would. For Ms. Johnson's comment, we have capped the density at 2 units an acre. So it's not 5 units an acre or 3 units an acre. It's just 2 units an acre. And that's a condition of the zoning. And the second part of her letter was about a second entry. There was no TIA done to determine whether a second entry was needed or not. It just isn't physically possible on this property that's bound by the highway and major stream. So there's just not a possibility for that second entry. And that's another reason that the density was capped. As for Mr. Yoakley's letter, I talked to Mr. Yoakley this afternoon. He was not clear on where the entry to the property was. After we went over the maps again, he was fine with the development and wished us luck on it.
Very good. Do the commissioners have anything that they'd like to comment on or deliberate? Chair recognizes Commissioner Uzak.
Mr. Shannon, could you refresh us about the requirement to have access points based on the number of access points based on the number of properties in the area?
The development ordinance notes that if you have more than 50 lots, you would have to have 2 points of access. And I believe when you get up to 151, it's 3. It's hard to, that's ideal world, vacant piece of property, everything's being developed at the same time. In this situation, you have an existing subdivision that started developed 20 plus years ago. And it's difficult to impose current day standards on something that started such a long time ago. In this situation, when this subdivision built, it was intended for all of this to be single family, but there were no other means of access due to the location of I-74 and that stream that runs along the southern boundary of the site. So they're locked in. And that's something that staff looks at not only for rezoning, but also as far as our technical review committee in trying to fairly use the development ordinance and allow development of land. You know, if this were to come in today and none of those other units were there, we would look at a design that possibly could maybe have 2 access points to Gordon. But you're dealing with existing situations out there, and you really can't restrict them in that manner when you're dealing with something that's developed in phases over a 20-year period and ordinances have changed.
So when you were explaining about like over 150 homes or lots, you needed 3 access points.
Yeah.
Is that like a land use designation that we were talking about earlier? Or is this an ordinance?
That is part of our subdivision regulations.
Okay.
When someone comes in for a subdivision, that's part of the standards we look at. Now, I would note for this site, when you look at it, they do have 3 access points. It's just the fact that leads to a road that takes you to Gordon Way, so it's one-way in and out for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I counted the lots that already exist there, and there's about 100 of them. And they're talking about adding 80. So we're talking about 180 lots, all of which have only 1 access point off of Gordon Road.
Yes, and in this situation, like I said, we're dealing with a land that has developed in phases over the years under different ordinances. Yeah. And that's something that our TRC takes a look at. But when you look at the technical standards, they have 3 access points.
Yeah. So we're not, the city's not at risk for somebody dies because an ambulance can't get back there?
These are situations that you have throughout the city, especially in older subdivisions. Those are situations we try to avoid as new development comes in. But you have older subdivisions throughout the city prior to current standards coming that have that situation. And when new development comes in, clean slate, we, as best as possible, try to adhere to the development ordinance to have multiple ways in and out.
I'm just going to add a little history. This development was a larger development at one time, and it was under a different set of access requirements at that time. A part of it was developed prior to the recession, and then it's set, this larger tract is set for a number of years. It is under different ownership than the original development. So we have to look at this residual like a new development. So as Herb mentioned, they do meet the requirement of 3 access points. We can't have it look at what was the prior development because it wasn't under the current ownership's control. So they don't have the ability to go back and undo requirements. And like I said, the standards were different at the time of original development as it is today. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Venable, I was going to make kind of a similar point. I guess it gets difficult, I would think, for a developer developing a property that adjoins another development to have to go back and meet standards that apply to the total package rather than just their piece of land that they're having rezoned. So that makes sense.
Anything else? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Chair recognizes Mr. Walsh.
I'll make a motion to approve zoning map amendment 21-22 as presented.
I'll second.
Commissioner Moore has seconded the motion to recommend favorably as presented by staff. Are there any questions? Are there any other further comments before we take a vote? If not, I'll ask the recording secretary to take the roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please respond yes or no in response to the motion by Mr. Walsh to recommend approval of zoning map amendment 2102. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift. Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
By a vote of 9-0, this request by True Homes has been favorably recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. We will need a consistency statement in support of this recommendation for the record.
I'll do the consistency statement.
Chair recognizes Commissioner Swift.
I move that the commission adopt the statement that zoning map amendment 21-02 is consistent with the city's adopted policy guidance because the request of CZR5 zoning is supported by the low-density residential land use classification of the adopted land use plan. Furthermore, the request is reasonable and in the public interest because the requested CZR5's district, along with the physical constraints of the zoning site, will produce a residential development with a density similar to the surrounding area.
We have a second.
I'll second.
Consistency statement has been moved by Commissioner Swift and seconded by Commissioner Walsh. I'll ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please answer yes or no in response to the motion to adopt the consistency statement as stated by Ms. Swift. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 9-0, the motion carries. The recommended statement of consistency has been adopted. Final public hearing on this item will be held before the High Point City Council on March 15th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. in these chambers. The next item on tonight's agenda is Eastchester Drive I-74 land use assessment. I believe we can move right into deliberation or discussion by the commissioners. Chair recognizes Commissioner Morgan.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say that this is well done, and there's a lot of information that's in this particular packet. This particular one it has what we do is in this particular role. This is the stuff that's really important from my perspective because this is really what we're going to be looking at. This is going to affect that particular corridor for the next 20 years, and so. One of the motions that I would like to make on this Eastchester Drive land use assessment is to table this for 30 days and allow us to really digest what is in this information. Thank you.
So we have a motion to table this item for 30 days so that the commissioners can give it further consideration. Do we have?
I'll second it.
And Commissioner Walsh has seconded the motion. I would simply ask city staff, would tabling this motion, does this create any immediate problem for the city? Push anybody behind a particular timeline?
Lee, would you like me to answer it or do you want to answer it?
I'm coming to potty. No, there's nothing associated with this from a time perspective. We have actually quoted on it from some staff reports that are applicable. And if anything did come up in the intervening period of time, which I don't think there would, we would still quote on it to let you know that this is something that while it may not be adopted policy, it's policy under consideration. So.
Very well, thank you.
While you're up for a second, could you explain to the group exactly what is going to happen here? You explained earlier to us for really quickly about what we're voting on and the cause and effects as it relates to it.
Sure. The commission has anything here that comes before you have the authority to recommend approval because you're making a recommendation to council and council establishes policy. So you're either making a recommendation to approve, recommendation to deny, or making a recommendation to modify. So you clearly have the authority to say, we agree with this, we don't agree with this in terms of the recommendations that come from that. There is a list of recommendations in each assessment, both the Eastchester assessment as well as the Jamestown bypass assessment. Each of them, if the council does adopt this as a policy statement, then each of them would come back to you in its own official capacity, either as a street name change or as a plan amendment or as a zoning change, and probably on different schedules, to be honest with you. Some things can be done sooner and some things will be tied more, like in the case of Jamestown bypass, will be tied into the road construction. So, for example, some street name changes make it go sooner. Some changes may have to relate for some road configuration before we can make some street name changes. Staff has a Basically, we have a implementation list and we're developing a schedule. So we will be monitoring, and if approved by both the commission and the council, we will be taking into those individual recommendations that come from that to task and be, carrying them out probably over the next 18 months. So, and the only thing I would say, if you do, since both these assessments have sort of gone hand in hand, I would suggest if you do table one to table the other as well.
Thank you. All right. Are there more questions?
No, I just want to know, I didn't second it because there's anything wrong with it. I think Mr. Morgan had a good ideas for 30 days. Everybody on here looks. So if there's any change or anything, she'll have an idea because y'all done a great job. So I did not second it saying there's anything wrong. I think it looks great. And some people will say, well, if it looks great, why did you second it? I just think it gives everybody a chance to look at it a little bit longer.
Can we change the motion to take care of both of them? If we're going to,
Well, we need to do two separate votes.
Hey, guys and commissioners, this is Megan. I think the appropriate motion would be to postpone consideration, and let's go ahead and give it a certain date. So if you want to do 30 days, and I would say, next month's meeting, and then make sure we state the reason that is so you all have additional time to review it.
Sure. We have a date for our next meeting. It's not in front of me.
It'll be March 23rd.
Be the 23rd. Very well. So we have a motion for a 30-day postponement of this particular request to be brought up again on March 23rd, our next regular meeting. This is being done in the interest of allowing the commissioners to further review the information that's been presented to us. Commissioner Wallace has seconded that motion. And unless there's further questions, I will ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please respond yes or no to the motion to postpone consideration of the Eastchester Drive and I-74 land use assessment to the March 23rd meeting. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift. Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. This, by a vote of 9-0, this request by the City of High Point has been postponed for an additional 30 days to be heard at our regular March 23rd meeting to allow the commissioners further time to review the information. And with that, we will move to the final item on the agenda tonight, which is the Jamestown bypass land use assessment. And leading in from what the city attorney said, someone like to move that we do the same thing for the same reason.
Yeah, I'll make a motion. This is Commissioner Walsh. I'll make a motion to extend it for 30 days till our March 23rd meeting.
Second.
Commissioner Morgan has seconded the motion. Again, this is a motion to postpone this request for 30 days, during which time the commissioners will have time for further review, and we will take it up again at our regular March 23rd meeting. Unless there's any questions or comments on the motions, I'll ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please answer yes or no in response to the motion to postpone consideration of the Jamestown bypass land use assessment to the March 23rd meeting. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 9-0, this request by the City of High Point has been postponed for 30 days for further review by this commission, and we'll take the matter up again at our regularly scheduled March 23rd meeting. Is there any other business before the commission this evening? If not, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Walsh has seconded the motion to adjourn. I'll ask the recording secretary to take a roll call vote.
Commissioners, when I call your name, please answer yes or no in response to the motion to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Uzak.
Yes.
Mr. Kirkman.
Yes.
Ms. McGill. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Swift.
Yes.
Mr. Venable.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Wheatley.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 votes in favor of that motion.
Very well. By a vote of 9-0, we are adjourned.
Yeah, I thought you was asking about that.